let's begin the modeling portion of our training by creating the outer engine shell. So we're just going to start with a blank scene and build everything up from there. And now if at any point through this training you want to go in and see what's been done with the project files, we're going to go ahead and save those out sequentially. So you're going to have a project file to start with for every lesson. You know, ideally you want to go ahead and just start from nothing and take it all the way through. But if you want to come in and take a look at some of the ways that we've done things here, or some of the objects that we've created, you can go ahead and start with one of those project files if you like, and those will be located with your downloaded project files. But we're going to start out here with just a blank scene, and we want to get some geometry in here to begin with. So if you remember, we're going to go ahead and go to our Create panel over here in the Command panel. And so under Create, we've got Geometry selected, and we want to select a standard primitive because we're just going to make a basic cylinder. So I'm going to go ahead and select a cylinder. Now I don't want to click and drag to create this. I want to actually use the keyboard entry to drop this in. So if you want to click and drag, that's fine. Your parameters are going to be located right here, as we kind of touched on earlier. Or you can come in, drag this out, pull that up, and there you've got some geometry. But I'm actually going to use the keyboard entry to do this. So I'm going to select a radius. So let's do maybe a radius of 5 and a height of 10. And then you can change the position, but I'm going to leave that all at 0. So it's created right there in the middle, and just hit Create. Now at this point, I can't really do anything else with this with our Create panel. I can create more geometry, but I really want to modify the geometry that I've already created. So once I've created something, I'm going to jump over to the Modify panel, and here I can see the cylinder listed. I'll go ahead and hit Z to zoom in on that. And so you can see right now I've got the edged faces on. You can just hit F4 to toggle that back and forth. You can also turn on and off your selection bracket with the J key, depending on what you want to be able to see. So from here, we can start to change the parameters of our object. The first thing I want to do is rotate it. I want it to be kind of facing along the X direction. So I've turned on angle snap, and if I right click on this, you can see it's set to an angle of 5 degrees. So going in to our rotate, we're hitting E. We can rotate that in increments of 5 degrees. So I'll just rotate that down about 90 degrees. In this case, minus 90. We can go back in now and modify our parameters. So I want to make this a little bit longer. So we'll change the height. Just pull that out. Okay. If you want to make the radius a little bit smaller or larger, you can do that too. Here we can change the number of sides. So if we want something very low res, you can see we can take that down to, for instance, 6 sides. But dealing with polygons, we're going to want to get something that's fairly smooth, and to do that we want to add a lot of polygons. So there are ways of smoothing our objects after we work on them. In this case, we're just going to create a higher res piece. So we'll go ahead and up the number of sides, and we can take those back up to something like 30, 36. So we get a nice smooth curve there. We can also add some segments along the height. You can see here, you can add some resolution there. We're not going to need to go too high on this particular along the height, so we won't do too much there. If you'd also like to add segments along the cap, you can start to do that. You can see if we leave that off at segment of 1, there's just a large n-gon here, and that's okay for our purposes because we're going to go ahead and modify that. Okay, and an n-gon is basically a polygon face that has more than 4 sides. So looking at these are 4-sided, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this is going to be an n-gon. So when you hear that term, just think of a polygon object, or polygon face rather, with more than 4 sides. All right, so now we've got our primitive shape here, and this is nice because we're able to modify the parameters. If we want to go back and change the radius, we can do that. If we want to change the height, we can certainly do that. All of these values are available to us to modify to get the object looking the way that we want. Now the bad thing is we can't access any of the sub-objects, so any of the little components here that we're going to be looking at. So before we do that, let's see if there's anything else that we can do here with our primitive. One thing that we can do is add some shape to it, okay, some overall shape, and we can do that using a modifier. So over here in our modifier stack, you can see we only have a cylinder right now, but what we can do is start to pile modifiers on top of this to manipulate our geometry in different ways. So in this case, we want to taper our object, so I'm going to go into the modifier list and choose the taper modifier. It's going to drop that on, and you can see we have now this orange box, kind of this gizmo here, on top of our cylinder. Now we can go ahead and drop under the cylinder. You can see that I can manipulate that gizmo, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it alone. We also have this little light bulb here. It doesn't become apparent what that does until we change some of the parameters. So under our taper, we have an amount and a curve here on the top of our rollout. So if we change the amount to a positive amount, you can see that tapers out the end, tapers it, makes it larger. If we give it a negative amount, it's going to make that smaller. Okay. We can also change the curve. So if I, for instance, build this up to something like that, we can also add a curve to this. So we can add kind of a bulge there, or make that a little bit more curved in that direction if we want to go that way. Okay, so we get a lot of control here, and we still have the ability to go in and modify our creation parameters here with this taper. Okay, now if you're selecting your cylinder and you're not seeing the taper happen, you may have this button right here turned off. Okay, so what's happening is we're not seeing anything above the cylinder. We're only seeing the cylinder itself. So if we want to show end result, then we can just click that button, and then we can see the effect of the taper even as we're modifying the cylinder. To turn off the effect, we can click on that little bulb there. Okay, I'm going to take my curve down to 0 and just modify this a little bit. Now at this point, we still cannot access any of the sub-objects of our cylinder. So what we can do is either add an edit poly modifier here. So going up here and adding another modifier and creating a stack that way. Okay, you can see there, that gives us some flexibility because we can still go in and modify our cylinder, the parameters of our cylinder, but then we also get the option to modify the polygon. If we want to get rid of a modifier here, we can go ahead and remove it from the stack, and that leaves us with our two base pieces. If we want to kind of bake everything down into just a baked down polygon object that we can manipulate, what we can do is right click on our object, and we can, if we have a stack here, collapse all. That'll bake all of the modifiers into our object. Say yes. That's going to create an editable mesh, and you can see that the shape it's retained that tapered shape even though we don't have that modifier on this anymore. Now you'll find going through some of the other tools, a few of them I believe require an editable mesh, but a lot of the tools you're going to find will be you'll be able to use with this object as an editable poly. So to convert this, we'll just right click on this, open the quad menu here, and we can go all the way down here under transform to convert, and then this will allow us to convert it to an editable poly. And you'll find yourself doing this a lot, converting your objects here. So as an editable poly, if we open this up, you can see that we have a number of sub-objects available. We have our vertices, or vertex, edge, border, polygon, and element. So we can toggle through these using the numbers on our keyboard, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. We can also come in here and under selection, we can toggle through them in this way as well. Okay, so we have access to all of now our sub-objects. So points, or vertices, we've got edges, and we've got a border, which would be like an open border, and then polygons here. Okay, and the element would be the whole thing. So we could have multiple elements in here. All right, so now we can really start to get in and do some modeling on this piece. So let's say we want to add a little bit of detail up here. This is going to be the front of our engine. So we want to start to modify this. We can go to our polygon sub-object, select the front, okay, and now what we can do is start to modify this using some modeling tools. And there are several places that we can find our modeling tools, and one of those places is going to be here under our rollout, under Edit Polygons. You'll have a number of tools that you're able to use. And then we also have the graphite modeling tools that we're able to use as well. So there's going to be a couple different ways that we can manipulate this. And there's also a new in-context direct manipulation UI that we can use to make our lives a little bit easier when extruding this in. So let's go ahead and cut off the lesson here, and we'll really start to get going a little bit faster as we go through this process. We just want to kind of get up to speed with where things are and how to access the tools and things like that, but we'll really start to get things going a little bit more as we come in the next lesson and start to modify this outer engine shell. So let's do that next.